Hello students and welcome again to Legacy IAS Academy. In this lecture, we will be looking at the union budget with respect to specifically or majorly the static part of it as to how it is prepared. How it is prepared. At the same time, we will also see what we can expect from this year's budget. All right. So let us get started. So before we move into the stages of budget, the very first question that should come in our mind is, why is budget even required at the first place? Now, you may come up with various theories because there is a government, there's a system, all that is fine. But the basic reason for the requirement of the budget is the fact that the resources that are there is limited. Resources are limited. Just imagine, let's take an example of the budget that you may be making at your home, right? So the home budget, the household budget. So if there would have been an unlimited supply of money, would you plan anything? Would you plan that, this year, by this year, I'll be buying this year, I'll buy that, or, these many times I can take the trip outside, go or do this or buy this particular car, etc., etc. You won't even have to think once, right? Why? Because there is an unlimited flow. But when the flow of cash is limited, restricted, you have a given amount of salary or profit or income, if you call, then what you have to do is you have to plan accordingly. You have to plan as to how much you will spend on rent of the house if you are living in a rented house, right? At the same time, how much will you spend on food? How much will you spend on clothes? How much you should keep aside for emergency purposes, so on and so forth. So these become your heads. Why are you doing this complete exercise? Because of the limitation of the cash or money at your hand. So that is the basic reason. The limitation or the scarcity of the resources makes us to do budgeting. Now, apart from that, it depends how much scarcity is there. For example, if it is too scarce, if it is lesser, then you need to be more accurate, more efficient with respect to and more impactful with respect to your spending. That's one thing. Secondly, apart from restriction, if you have more issues at hand, then also you need to be even more accurate and efficient with it. For example, let's assume the population and everything and the budget and the revenue, everything of India would have been the same, but each and every one of us would have been very affluent, doing exceptionally well, and India would have been a developed country. A lot of expenditure could have been avoided and that money could have been used somewhere else. Just for example, a lot of social sector schemes could have been reduced. Pension scheme, this scheme, or maybe free National Food Security Act could have been taken out because everyone has income and money to buy the food, right? So that money could be utilized in research and development, make sense? Or in some cutting edge technology or something else, in some other field, in sports, etc. But people are hungry, people are poor, you need to feed them, you need to get them out of poverty. So what the government needs to do? Spend here. So when you spend here, you will be spending less somewhere else. So in budget, there will always be a trade-off. We need to understand that. So whenever it is said that this sector has reduced, take it with a pinch of salt, because some other sector may have had the requirement to be spent over there. All right. Having said that, let us now move on to the stages of budget. What are the stages involved for this budgeting process? We will look at it in detail. So the very first stage is estimates of expenditure and revenue. This is the most important step. In fact, this is literally the entire budget, right? Of course, there will be a lot of things further to be done, but this is quite literally the entire budget wherein you are estimating the entire expenditure and revenue. We'll go in detail of each and everything, but just have a glance at it. Then is the first estimate of deficit. What is deficit? A shortfall. So your revenue is 100, but you want to spend 105. So 5 rupees is the deficit, the shortfall. Then narrowing of the deficit. So your deficit is 5 rupees. Can you reduce it? Can you narrow it down from 5 rupees to 3 rupees? How that is done, we'll see that as well. After all that is done, then the budget is presented, okay, by the finance minister. After the budget is presented, then the discussion on the budget takes place. These are sequential, these are in chronological order, and logically also you can remember them. For example, the discussion will only take place once the budget is presented, not before that, because you need to have the document in front of you. After the discussion has taken place, general discussion, it is generic in nature, then a detailed microscopic scrutiny needs to be done. So scrutiny, and that scrutiny is not done by each and every parliamentarian, the opposition. No, there is a committee for it. So departmental committees will do that. Once that scrutiny is done, after the scrutiny, then again it is put forward and the voting on the demand for grants take place. Once the voting is done, in voting, the things that need to be passed, the budget, the money bill, the finance bill, it's by simple majority. So since the government is there, government also needs minimum simple majority. It can have more number of seats also, that's a different thing. But so if the government is there, it is having the confidence, all these bills get easily passed. There is no issue whatsoever. But if the finance bill fails, what does that mean? That means the government has lost the confidence. Right? But that can happen. Of course it can happen. Right? It generally happens in a coalition government. Anyway, let's move forward. That was a polity part. Further to that, there is passing of the appropriation bill and finally the passing of the finance bill. All these bills needs to be passed by simple majority. So these are the stages or steps involved in budgeting process. So now let us look at each one of them step by step. First is the estimates of expenditure and revenue. So how do you do that? The entire spending is done by the government. Now the government is broken down into different ministries, right? So what you have to do is ask each ministry, or each ministry will come up with how much money they will have. So two things you need. One, how much money is required to be spent. Second, how much money you will be getting or earning. These are the two most important things. So we are talking about expenditure and revenues. So how much money needs for expenditure by each ministry, in which sector, or let's say in which schemes where it is required to be spent. Second, how much revenue will be generated or can be generated and from where. That is also important. You cannot simply say X, Y, Z. No. Out of this X, where will this X1 will come from where, X2 will come from where, X3 will come from where, so on and so forth. What are the sources of revenue for the government? See, the revenues can be either, the revenue or the receipts can be either revenue receipts, or it can be capital receipts. Now, what do you understand by revenue receipts? Now, revenue receipts, if you understand the definition of revenue and capital receipts, it's very simple. Capital receipts is the receipt that you will get by either reducing your assets or increasing your liability. Means what? It means that capital receipt, for example, loan is a capital receipt. For example, disinvestment is a capital receipt. So what is disinvestment? It is as good as selling of the PSUs, either partially or completely. So PSU is an asset. When you sell that asset partially or completely, your asset goes down, but you get the money. So you are getting the money by lowering the asset, or you take the loan, so you increase the liability. So any receipt of the government or anyone for that matter, any receipt which either lowers the asset or increases the liability is a capital receipt. Opposite to that is the revenue receipt. Any receipt which neither increases or decreases either the asset or the liability, basically not having any impact on the asset liability situation, is the revenue receipt. Now, revenue receipt consists of two types: tax and non-tax. So what is tax revenue receipts? Tax revenue receipt consists of again two types: direct taxes as well as indirect taxes. So direct tax means corporate tax, income tax, service tax, so on and so forth. Indirect taxes means the GST, all those things are indirect taxes. GST, customs, tariffs, all these are indirect taxes which the government gets. Now, one thing you need to understand is direct taxes are progressive in nature, whereas indirect taxes are regressive in nature. What do we mean by that, progressive and regressive? Progressive means sort of a good thing. Progressive taxation is a better way of taxing rather than regressive in nature. So what is the difference? Direct tax, progressive means what happens in direct taxes, someone who earns more money pays more taxes. That's clear. In regressive nature of taxes, or let's say indirect taxes, which is there in India, what happens is, no matter how much you earn, both the person pay the same money. Let me give an example. For direct taxes, what is happening? Your salary is, let's say, 2.49 lakh per annum. You don't pay any taxes. Someone else's salary is, let's say, 15 lakh. They end up paying 2 lakh of taxes or something like that, because it is slab wise. Someone who's earning 1 crore will be paying more money as taxes. Make sense? And at different level of income, there is different percentage of taxation as well. But when so that is fine, fair enough. But when not fine, of course, it's tax we have to pay, and if we are not getting good services in return, that is a concern. So that's a different discussion altogether, but I hope the concept is clear. Now when it comes to indirect taxes, in indirect taxes, what happens is, someone who's earning 50 lakhs per annum and another person who is earning, let's say, just 1 lakh per annum, if they both want to buy a toothpaste, let's say they both use Pepsodent toothpaste, they pay the same tax, same indirect tax on that Pepsodent or any XYZ toothpaste that they are buying, or a Pepsi bottle or a Thumbs Up bottle, or in fact a cake if they are purchasing to celebrate the birthday. In fact, now the GST on cake has increased. Now it is 18%, so it is more difficult for you to celebrate the birthday, especially if you are from the poor section of the society. So on that cake also, if 500 rupees of cake is there, there will be around 18%. So let's say 90 rupees of tax. So 590 rupees worth of cake. So this person also pays 90 rupees of tax. This person also pays 90 rupees of tax on that cake. So that is regressive in nature, because a poor person is also paying the same amount as the rich person is paying. So that is regressive in nature. Anyway, this is the tax revenue component is from direct as well as indirect taxes. Whereas non-tax revenue comes from your fees, your registration fees, penalties, punishment that you pay for traffic challan, this, that, everything comes. Even the registration of houses, which is quite high, around 7% is the registration fee. So if you are buying a house of 1 crore rupees, 7 lakh would be required to be paid as a registration fees. And imagine a house in the last 25 years is being bought and sold, let's say 10 times. So that is 70 lakh worth of course it will be at different rate. So it will be a huge amount of registration fees that you might have paid. Then you have property tax, this tax, all those taxation would be coming here. This would be non-tax because it is registration of a particular property, not a tax. In capital receipts, what comes is generally the disinvestment that the government is doing in PSUs. The government owns the PSUs, it is their asset. If they disinvest, if they sell it off, so they get the money, that is a capital receipt. Another way is to borrow money, to take loan, whether it is external borrowing or domestic borrowing, that will also come under capital receipts. But there is one differentiating factor between these two types of capital receipts. What is the differentiating factor? The differentiating factor is this: when you sell off an asset, the asset gets lowered and you get the money, it is a non-debt creating capital receipt, because there is no debt that has been created, there is no liability that is created. Of course your asset has gone down, but no debt has been created. But if you borrow money, a liability or a debt is created, that is debt creating receipt, debt creating capital receipt. And when you sell off the asset, it is a non-debt creating capital receipt. I hope that is absolutely clear. So estimates of expenditure and revenue is clear. Revenue, so revenue comes from revenue receipts as well as capital receipts. Expenditure, ministry wise, where you need to spend how much for what scheme, from which section, and what impact it will have, so on and so forth. Once you do these two things, everything else is a straightforward thing, because first step is the most difficult, is the most detailed one, and of course the scrutiny by the committee. Rest is a simpler one. So let us look at the second one. First, estimate of deficit. It's very simple. You know the total revenue, you know the total expenditure. So what do you get? You get the deficit. Clear? Now once you get the deficit, then you try to narrow it down. How do you narrow it down? I'll tell you how. 100 rupees is the revenue, 105 is the expenditure, so 5 rupees is the deficit. You want to reduce it to 3 rupees. How do you do that? You realize that I may have a deficit of 5 rupees, I want to reduce it to 3 rupees. So what I can try to do is, my expenditure is fixed. So can I make my revenue 102? so that it will give me 3 rupees of deficit. How can I make this 102? Can I play with the taxation percentage? And that's when you see the tax slabs may change, the slabs may differ, or the percentages in each slab may change. So the percentage of tax may increase, maybe from the income tax, the direct corporate tax, or maybe from GST, etc. All that playing with the taxes will take place over here, or bringing a new cess, the green cess, the carbon cess, this cess, education cess, so on and so forth. There is another way. What is another way? Of course, one way can be to persuade people to, basically abide by the taxation law, but you can try as much as you can. Even after trying, you have estimated it. So you cannot just imaginarily increase that, right? So this makes more sense because this is a more objective way. Second is you can borrow the money. So let me borrow. Anyhow, you have to, if you are spending 105, where will that 5 extra come from? From borrowing only. So borrowing is, of course, the last resort. That's not a problem. That is basically you're not reducing the deficit, because again you have to pay back the money, the liability is created. So the way is to play with the tax rates, etc., tax slabs, GST tax rates, so on and so forth, or bring in a new cess, surcharge, or various other things the government can look at. Now, once that is done, that's when the budget is presented. Now, when you talk about the presentation of budget, remember, it is the president who causes the budget to be laid in front of both the houses of the parliament. But it is the finance minister who presents the budget. So in your prelims paper, remember on the wording, if they are saying who causes the budget to be laid in the parliament, it's the president, not the finance minister. Then what does the finance minister do? The finance minister actually presents the budget. So finance minister presents the budget, whereas the president causes the budget to be laid in front of both the houses of the parliament. And of course, this budget is presented presently as it stands on 1st of February. It will be presented on 1st of February. Previously, it was presented on the last working day of February. Then why did we shift? We shift because we will now, when it's presented on 1st February, there is more time to discuss, to do things, to approve, so on and so forth. Now, once the budget is presented, then general discussion takes place. Finance minister gives the speech, tells everything in rosy words, nicely, this is increased, this is improved, this is what we will do, we'll provide this much, that much, everything. Right? Some things where there are shortfalls, where they have reduced. Whatever they have increased doing good, they may say, but whatever is reduced is less, they may not present. So, but the document will tell you everything. So then the budget document, then what happens is a general discussion. In the general discussion, what happens is, the other parliamentarians, especially from the opposition party, right, other parties, they would then discuss and speak about it. And when they speak about it, of course, finance minister reserves the right to reply to their speech and their words. Okay, so that is what a general discussion is. After the general discussion, the scrutiny will happen by the departmental committee. Again, a very important stage. Right, again a very important step, because presently only the general discussion has happened. Who will scrutinize in detail at micro level? That is, thus departmental committees will do it, which requires around 3 to 4 weeks, means close to a month is required to do that. Okay. Once that particular thing is done, then the departmental committee submits the reports back. After the scrutiny, this is the finding, this is the report. Once the report is presented, then voting on demand for grants takes place. This takes place based on the report of the departmental committees, because they may say this is an unnecessary, this is too much, this is less, this should be more, whatever analysis, or this is not required, that should not be there, whatever comments, whatever feedback, whatever analysis was done, a report is presented. Based on that, voting on demand for grants will take place. Okay. So demand for grant, it will become a grant after it is duly voted upon by the Lok Sabha. Not just voted upon, but after, passed by the Lok Sabha is what you can say. Now, once that is done, then happens the passing of the appropriation bill. This is very important. Why? Because the Constitution of India says that no money can be taken out from the Consolidated Fund of India without the proper approval, as a result of which appropriation bill. Bill means the bill which will help you to appropriate money. Appropriate money means to take out from the fund and to spend, giving the right to the government to spend. Who does that? The appropriation bill, when it is passed by the parliament. Not the parliament, basically the Lok Sabha. The Rajya Sabha doesn't have any power whatsoever. Because once it's passed, it is forwarded to the Rajya Sabha. Rajya Sabha can comment, they can say, they can show their let's say dissatisfaction, whatever it is, and say, no, this should not be there, this should be there, whatever. But it is the sole right of the Lok Sabha to completely ignore it. Okay? Alright? So that's what the case is. After appropriation bill, the finance bill is passed. In finance bill, you also have the revenue side. Appropriation bill will have the expenditure side, that I want to spend these 1,000 crore rupees or these lakh crore rupees. So I should be able to take out this from the Consolidated Fund of India to spend. So it was the appropriation bill. But the finance bill would also consist of the revenue side, that I want to collect taxes from the people in this way, that way, from this place, that sector. That will happen. The revenue side would be there in the finance bill. Okay. Now let's come. So I hope the entire process, once that is also approved, everything is approved, and the next fiscal year is, sorted with respect to the budget. I hope that that's absolutely clear. Now, what can we expect from the budget 2025-26? So how do we even think as to what to expect? And what to expect can have two parts. What do I expect? What do you expect? And what actually may happen is an estimation what is going to happen. So we'll look at a mix of these things, what to expect and what might happen. So what to expect also you can deduce by understanding what has happened previously. So let's look at the second thing first. Reversal in expenditure on social sector scheme. What does this mean? See, what has happened is, in the previous years, the percentage spent on social sector schemes or the social sector spending has gone down. So there is a possibility that it will resurrect and increase this time around. That's one thing. Second, new tax landscape. Why? Because people who are paying the direct taxes, especially the service sector, the service employees, the salaried employee for that matter, be it in any sector, the salaried employees, they are, facing the brunt of the taxes, a huge burden. At the same time, a huge amount of dissatisfaction is there. See, what happens is, when you have a business, you take money in cash, you don't pay tax, you sidestep the laws, all that stuff. Now, it's not to suggest that, not paying the taxes is good. No, of course not. But at the same time, when the salaried employee is there, the money directly gets deposited in their account. The TDS gets cut, everything. What I'm trying to say is, they are probably the most law-abiding citizens when it comes to paying the taxes, either out of their own choice or out of compulsion. That is a secondary thing altogether, but they are the most law-abiding citizen when it comes to that. So they do want and expect some respite. We do expect some, development by the government, this, that. So that is there. At the same time, some respite, some reduction. So that has been expected since a long time now, and it is quite long overdue. So there is a possibility of a new tax landscape. Next is incentivizing reverse flipping. This is very important and interesting concept. What is reverse flipping? See, there might be a company, Indian company, right, which has established its headquarters in some other country, right? So reverse flipping means incentivizing that company to, push back or bring back its headquarters in India and do the main production and work in India. Why? It will help because it will increase the job, it will increase the GDP, address the job, unemployment issues, so on and so forth. Okay? So that would be a good thing. You can incentivize them to come to India. How can you incentivize, by the way? By clarity on taxation, by reduction on taxation, interest subvention scheme, product link incentive scheme, so on and so forth. And then finally, you have incentivizing research and development. This is absolutely important, because when you incentivize research and development, what happens is you come up with better things, efficient things, cutting edge technologies, and your efficiency in all the sector increases. Plus, you can also be an exporter of such technology, right? And you can be more self-sufficient than other countries. You won't have to rely on others, or you won't be behind, especially with respect to the Western world. The percentage spent on research and development in India is very less. That needs to increase, and not just in cutting edge technology with respect to increase in production, but with respect to medical facilities also, with respect to agricultural development also. Till now, HYV seeds are being bought from the foreign companies like Monsanto, right? If Indian company does that, it's even better. At the same time, you talk about artificial intelligence, chat GPT, etc. Now basically Chinese company, a Chinese startup, DeepSeek, has come up with their own artificial intelligence. What if India comes up with such things? See, Indian engineers, especially IT engineers, are doing great by earning foreign investment, or let's say foreign income from us, foreign currency for us, working for foreign companies, especially the US. But we are still working as an employee. Indians, or India doesn't own much of the the things on the internet, the softwares on the internet, or for example the browsers, the search engines. All these are of the foreign countries, especially the US. So if you talk about Google, Amazon has the cloud computing system, etc. Amazon, Google, Meta, Alphabet, all these are US based companies. Indians are working for them, creating their empire, capital and revenue generating things, and just getting revenue receipts, just salary, monthly salary. But India on itself has nothing. So research and development, if money is spent on this, we can become superpower sooner than we will without research and development. So this one thing probably, not just expected, but should be done by the government, but at the same time, we should all remember there is always a trade-off. If I increase the money here, I have to reduce somewhere else. So military defense is also very important, especially when you know that we are surrounded by literally enemy states from all the sides. Cannot say enemy states in the sense that we are not at war with them, but they have been historically and chronically like an enemy state with us. We have to be always prepared, right? If we blink, that's done. So that is why we need a huge amount of investment in military also. So remember, take it with a pinch of salt. There has to be a trade-off also. If you spend more, you have to spend less elsewhere, and else those other things can also be very important. But this is what we can expect. So let's wait and see for 1st of February what the budget brings us all. Thank you so much.